What an embarrassment. What a fall from grace for my girl, my boo, Smelly Jemele. Several years ago, Jemele Hill was at the pinnacle of sports media. She was making appearances on First Take where she was bantering back and forth with a real star, Stephen A. Smith. She was a panelist on Around the Horn back when the show featured actual sports journalists instead of the panel of nerds and wanker spankers that destroyed the franchise and forced it into cancellation. For a moment, for a very brief moment, Jemele Hill was considered a rising star in sports media. And within the span of a few years, Jemele Hill went from the pinnacle of sports media to being interviewed by some doofus named Rick Strom. Casey, who in the hell is Dick Palm? I really have no idea. This is no bullshit. I have no idea who this dude is. This is the fall from grace that I'm talking about. Jemele Hill went from ESPN to being interviewed by some dork who wasn't invited to his high school reunion because no one knew he was there. In the introductory video to his channel, which has less than 7,000 subscribers, in the introductory video, Dick says, "You're probably not used to seeing me." Yeah, truer words have never been spoken. I didn't know if I was watching YouTube or Unsolved Mysteries. Has anyone seen Dick Palm? He was last seen in the Bruce Caboose section at the CVS in Gay, Georgia, looking for discounted ointment. I would imagine that Ricky thought landing an interview with Jemele Hill was going to be his big break. He started YouTube at the beginning of the year, and he's only generated 70,000 views in the last 4 months. According to my calculations, that's just over 600 views a day. I'm sure he slid into Jemele Hill's DMs and said, "Hey, Smelly, it's me, Dickie P. I'm not like that other nerd who slid into your DMs asking for a date. I would like to interview you for my show, The Dickie Palm Show. If I interview a star of your caliber, my YouTube views will launch to the moon." Unfortunately for Rick, he vastly overestimated the drawing power of Smelly Jemele. His expose with the big star. It has generated less than 600 views in the past week, meaning interviewing Jemele Hill somehow underperformed on a channel that doesn't perform. His views went from nothing to not a damn thing. As you guys know, the business of mythical racism is bankrupt. The Wicked Weave, Joy Reid, she was the lone survivor in the business of mythical racism, a once prominent business that was responsible for the failed careers of Bomani Jones, Jemele Hill, Tiffany Cross, better known as Tiffer the Bongo Sniffer, Donatello Foxworth. But my name is Dominique. It doesn't matter what your name is. The business of mythical racism, it was also the origin for the Huge Embarrassing Failure Awards. An award show that proved that mythical racism exists because Johnny B. Biden, he was the first winner. But when MSNBC fired the Wicked Weave Joy Reid, it signaled the official end to the business of mythical racism. Now, with that being the case, you would think Jemele Hill would adjust her content. She would adjust her style to create content that people want to watch. Unfortunately for Rick Strom, who was hoping that Smelly Jemele would elevate his channel, unfortunately for Ricky, Jemele Hill is stuck in the past. Make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. Link to the second channel is in the description below. Today on the second channel, going to be talking about the massive ratings declines in the NHL. 2 months ago, the NHL was elevated into the mainstream for the first time in years. Clearly, people were not interested in the actual hockey. They weren't interested in the players. The mainstream exposure, it was based on a gimmick, and time quickly ran out on the gimmick for the NHL. So if you haven't already, click the link in the description below, subscribe to the second channel. Somehow, Ricky Palm spoke to Jemele Hill for almost 2 hours. No wonder the video has less than 600 views. What could you possibly speak to Jemele Hill about that would consume 2 hours of your time? If I were interviewing Jemele Hill, I can only think of 2 somewhat prominent questions. Why are you so obsessed with race? And how much money did your book publisher lose when they wasted the lives of thousands of trees and printed your shitty memoir? To be honest with you, those questions really aren't all that interesting, which is the reason I would not interview Jemele Hill, because she's not interesting. I would imagine that's also the reason that Jemele Hill can only land interviews with Rick Strom. He's the only one willing to give her a platform, and he doesn't have a platform to give. But during the interview, Jemele Hill talked about her favorite topic. It's her claim to fame. It's the same topic that she has exploited for almost a decade. Jemele Hill talked about being fired from the worldwide leader in woke, ESPN. Now, for normal people, it's not hard to figure out why Smelly Jemele was fired. When she was hosting the 6 p.m. edition of SportsCenter, which is one of the most valuable time slots on the network, when Smelly was hosting the show, SportsCenter was setting record low ratings. I guess the dudes in ESPN's audience didn't smell what Jemele was cooking. Either that or they didn't like the smell. ESPN, they saw immediate results when they fired Smelly Jemele. Ratings for the 6 o'clock edition of SportsCenter increased by 20%. But according to Jemele Hill, she was not fired for underperforming. She wasn't fired for being a huge embarrassing failure. According to Smelly and her new bestie Ricky, Jemele Hill was fired because ESPN wanted to de-blackify the network. I don't think that's a word, but I'll allow Jemele Hill to explain. Watch for yourself.
The two political, the two black, and those are really linked together, because what was political about us? This is something that I think a lot of black people know, is that your presence is just political, whether you want it to be or not. So the really what they were trying to say is, where they get these two black people from and why are they on my 6 o'clock Sports Center? Norby, I think he was aware of how the show was perceived. He did a lot to de-blackify the show. Not only did he get rid of our music, which was done by DJ Jazzy Jeff, and then they used what we call a voice from God to do the intro to Sports Center. And he may not admit it this way. I can't speak to what his intentions were, but let me tell you how it came off. It came off as, especially after there was a ratings meeting in which we were told that the number of white viewers were lowering for our show. And even though we maintained a very strong black viewership, they noticed that not as many white people were watching. And then suddenly all these changes come.
Okay, so Jemele Hill wants us to believe that mythical racism was the reason that she was fired. She claims that white people stopped watching because 2 black people were hosting SportsCenter. White people watched Sage Steele, who took over for Jemele Hill and raised ratings by 20%. White people watch First Take. There are days when I watch clips of First Take and I don't know if I'm watching ESPN or BET. The only white people on the screen are the ones walking the streets of New York City in the backdrop. White people did not tune out of SportsCenter because Jemele Hill was hosting. Trump supporters turned off ESPN because Jemele Hill accused Donnie of being a white supremacist. You see, when you're running a sports network, you want to appeal to the widest audience possible. Kinda hard to do that when the face of your flagship show is alienating half the country. A month after she alienated half the country, Jemele Hill took it a step further by calling for a boycott of the NFL because Jerry Jones was benching any player who kneeled for the national anthem. I'm no expert in television, but I'm pretty sure it's not a good idea to call for a boycott of the most powerful league in the country, especially when the network you're working for was currently in a volatile or unsteady partnership with the NFL at the time. It has been 7 years since Jemele Hill was fired by ESPN. In that time, she hosted a podcast on Spotify called Jemele Hill is Unbothered. Yeah. It was the perfect title for the show because no one was listening to bother Jemele Hill. Real easy to be unbothered when you don't have an audience to bother you. Even though most people didn't realize the podcast existed, Jemele Hill was able to capitalize on her marginalized status by pressuring Spotify to give her hundreds of thousands of dollars in sympathy money. This was sometime around 2021, maybe 2022, when Spotify was begging Joe Rogan with millions of dollars to be exclusive on their platform. Since the white man was earning millions, Jemele Hill thought she should be given reparations. Spotify agreed to that deal temporarily, but as is always the case with sympathy money, there always comes a time when the beneficiary is expected to perform. Obviously, Jemele Hill incapable of drawing an audience, so Spotify sent her a thank you note for exploiting them and basically kicked her off the platform. She hosted a show on Vice with Carrie the Champion of Failure. The show was titled Carrie and Smelly Won't Stick to Sports. Unfortunately, they had no one to poke with their sticks because no one was watching the show. It was canceled after a handful of episodes. Jemele Hill published a fictional memoir detailing her favorite created stories of mythical racism. Failure. My inside sources tell me that Jemele Hill was at a Barnes & Noble doing a book signing years ago, and she was giving away free copies of her book. Instead of taking a complimentary book, customers walked into the store to buy books that they would actually read. Today, Jemele Hill's hosting a show on... Hell, I can't even remember the network. I think it might be on the HEF network, the HEF network, the network for huge embarrassing failures. Ratings are so low for the show, Nielsen is unable to record them. They can't even count her audience by the dozens. The run time for the show is a higher number than the people actually watching. Are you noticing a theme here? Casey, I'm noticing that Jemele Hill is a consistent failure. Yeah, but I'm talking about something else. It's one thing to be a failure. Failure's not a bad thing. We all fail. There are times when I feel like a failure. I am way more critical of myself than you guys are of me. I'm guilty of falling into the trap of blaming everyone but myself, but eventually I realize that I'm the only one responsible for learning from my mistakes, learning from my failure, and I'm the one that has to do something to improve, which is something that Jemele Hill has never done. For the better part of a decade, Jemele Hill has portrayed herself as the ultimate victim. She blamed ESPN for her failure. She blamed mythical racism. I'm sure at some point she has blamed mythical misogyny. When the real reason Jemele Hill is a failure is because she's not creating content that people want to watch. It's really that simple, but give me your thoughts on this. Jemele Hill blames racism for her decade of failure. She basically insinuates that ESPN didn't want black people hosting SportsCenter, even though Sage Steele replaced her and increased ratings by 20%. Now, this is the same ESPN that is currently standing by Shannon Sharpe in the midst of his scandal, but Jemele Hill wants to blame race. I think it's the reason that Jemele Hill has consistently failed. Instead of blaming herself, she blames everyone else. Do you agree? Sound off in the comments below. I'll see you guys later.